the 11th hour, and dear listeners, you are going to be in for a treat because we have a very special guest here this morning. I'm going to introduce him in a bit, but before that, reminding you, this is a special series with regards to the 95th year of the SLBC. So this is the 11th hour still, and we have with us Mr. Viran Corea. Hi, Mr. Viran, how are you?
Well, I'm keeping fine. It's wonderful to be here after a while.
That's right. But
feeling quite at home behind the mic, actually.
Of course. And I just had to say hi to you before introducing you because it's so lovely to see you. And of course, dear listeners, Viran needs no introduction. He is a veteran broadcaster and has been entertaining all of us for many, many years. And currently, of course, you know, he is a senior attorney at law and in private practice. And Viran, I must say, we miss you on the airwaves. Where have you been?
Well, trying to earn myself a living, more or less. But one thing about being behind the microphone is that it has an experience that is absolutely unique, and once the bug has bitten you, you really never get over it. So it's wonderful to be back here behind the mic and to enjoy this time with you and have a chat about some good times.
That's right, Viran. So dear listeners, we have with us Viran Corea, and of course he is going to keep us in great company for half an hour. And reminding you once again, he is a senior attorney at law in private practice, and well, you need no introduction. He's a veteran broadcaster entertaining us throughout the years for many years. So Viran, once again, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and gracing us with your presence.
Thank you.
And let's begin. Viran, how did you, I mean, of course, broadcasting runs in your genes, but how did you stumble upon SLBC or Radio Ceylon?
Well, actually, I think the first time that I came into Radio Ceylon was before I was born, because my mother used to work here. She worked at the front office soon after she had left school. And then she got married. She met my father, who was a broadcaster here as well. And basically, she got married and continued to work for a while. And so when she was pregnant with me, she would come in here, and then afterwards, when I was a young toddler, I would at times come in to work with her. So my recollection of this institution, the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation, actually extends well into my childhood. But your question really is how I got into broadcasting. Well, that's an interesting story. Of course, I grew up listening to radio and music, and I always loved the medium and had an affinity for it, and I grew up with a lot of it around me. But it all started, as far as joining a radio station or joining this radio station was concerned, it started when I had just done my A-levels in 1992, in August of 1992, and I was awaiting results. And a dear friend and colleague of mine, Viran Corea, who ended up joining the relief panel of announcers, as it is called, at the same time as me, we were great friends from school. We'd been schoolmates and friends, and we actually became lawyers together as well. I met up with him, and I had heard that there was this advertisement which had been put on the radio saying they are calling for radio announcers. And we had a chat and we thought, shall we try this? We were both due to get into the law faculty to commence our studies, to read for a law degree. But while waiting, we thought, why not do this? Because we'd been into drama and acting and all the usual stuff in school as well. So the spoken word as well as music was very close to our hearts. And Diane had already started doing some work as a news editor at the SLBC. But I had not done anything at all. So we both decided to apply for this relief announcer's position. They were taking in a batch of about 7 or 8. So I just lodged an application. Now, this was at a time when my father happened to be the Director General of the SLBC. Diane and I put in our applications when he was abroad. So I didn't have any chance to speak to my father even. When he came back, and he heard that I'd applied, he was not too pleased. He said, look, I am the Director General of Broadcasting, and if you face the interview and if you're the selection process, the mic test and the interview and so on, and you pass, people might think that I fixed the system and got you in. But he said, no, now that you've done it, I will not ask you to withdraw it. Yeah. But what he did was he basically declined to have anything to do with the selection process and left it alone. And so my friend Diane and I and a few others who also through this institution became great friends of mine and are friends to date, faced an interview and we got in, faced the mic test initially. We had a mic test through which we were selected. Then we had an interview and thereafter a second mic test. And after that we were put in training. So that's actually in a nutshell how I joined. And the journey hasn't ended. Well, it hasn't, in the sense that, well, I'm back here today behind a familiar microphone again. So to that extent, yes. And of course, the thing about being a radio presenter, Mario, is that, you know, the way in which you perceive the medium, even when you listen to it as a listener, alters permanently. So when I hear somebody on any radio station now, presenting music or doing an interview or an educational program, whatever it may be, I notice what they try to do in the way they do it, what they get right, what they get wrong, what they could have done better, the techniques they use, if there has been a change in approach to, you know, how they do things. I notice it at a different level. So since becoming a radio presenter, I would say that the way in which I have perceived and the way in which I even listen to radio has changed. And I'm sure it's the same for you. Definitely, Viran. And Viran, you would have had the opportunity to train with some of the greats, with some of the key names in broadcasting. Could you remind us of that process, that journey of training as well? Yes. Because I think training is very important, isn't it, Viran? Indeed, it is. It's very important. I would say that we had the fortune of having the benefit of some truly great presenters whom we were able to be taught by in the sense of lectures of sorts, as well as to understudy and be supervised by and helped along on the run. And of course, a coterie of radio personalities, great personalities of the past, who were simply just available at the other end of a phone if we needed to call and ask, is this the better way to do it? Or simply, is this how you pronounce this word? Because you see, at that time, there was no internet with which you could click on a button and hear it pronounced to you. We would rely on the Daniel Jones dictionary and so on. But sometimes certain things we just needed to ask someone. So there were many people like that. So I would remember people like Mr. Jimmy Barucha. Jimmy Barucha was perfect in terms of his diction. He was like a walking Daniel Jones dictionary. There wasn't a word that he didn't know to pronounce in the English language. And he was always readily available and accessible, and he was also involved in our training process. And when we started doing work on the air, understudying, I remember my very first shift was with the late V. Rajendra, with whom I continued to be colleagues for quite a while. And he had a very unique voice, isn't it? A very unique voice and a great knowledge of music of a certain vintage, because, you know, he'd seen and heard a lot of radio long before I had joined. In fact, I think he's my father's vintage. He joined a year before or after my father, somewhere there. He basically was the person I understudied with on what was the All Asia service. And on the All Asia service, there were loads of listeners from India and Pakistan and all parts of South Asia who would write to us. And there were lots of letters and so on with which we had to engage in some sort of, you know, audience engagement, as it were, or listener engagement. And it was a thoroughly enjoyable process because he was very nice. He was very friendly and very put you at ease and gave the right kind of guidance, so that, because although I'm able to talk like this now, the first time that I, you know, switched the mic on, basically every bone in my body was, you know, shuddering with anxiety and nervousness. But he would put me at ease, and I really enjoyed it. And soon after that, I on the local transmission for the Sri Lankan audience, the commercial service, I was put on the air with Arun Das Bandaranayake, another great radio personality with a lot of knowledge and a lot to contribute. I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed working with Rajan Vairavanathan, who had a very good popular taste in music. And he was very nice in that he would give a lot of junior announcers a lot of opportunities in any way he could. His brother Krishna, and there were so many others. I mean, I could rattle on and on. But I must say that it's been a wonderful experience to get to know these people. And the other thing about radio is even more than my regular profession. I'm a lawyer, and there it's almost like the military. Seniority counts for a lot. Sometimes counts for a lot too much, I would say. But with radio, to me, you're Mario, and to you, I'm Viran, right? It's a great leveler, and the greatest of the greats and the junior most presenter, while we do respect and value experience and expertise and learn from our seniors, it's a culture in which everybody is equal. And I like that about radio, because it's just you and your voice.
Viran, I must say you brought back memories, because even when I joined, I was put on the All Asia service, and that's how everybody trained, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it was it was nerve-wrenching sometimes. And I still remember V. Rajendra as well. So I think you brought back a lot of fond memories. So talking about fond memories, Viran, I mean, I'm sure you must be having many, but what do you remember as your fondest memory here at SLBC? Something that, when I say SLBC, Viran, something that immediately pops up in your head.
Well, I would say that it's the memory of a lot of good shows. A lot of good shows that I've done with a lot of my colleagues. I've enjoyed doing, a number of shows with my friend Dayan Kandappa, then many of my batchmates, then people who joined around, people like Dasaman Vijay Singh, Sunil Simon, Mohan Moraes, so many others. I'm missing out names simply because I don't want to rattle off about 20, 30. But with each of them, I have really good, great memories of wonderful shows done. And what is enjoyable is that to do a radio show properly, you don't just pick up a few records or CDs or whatever it is and just put them on and say whatever you think. You can, but if you really want something special, you put in a little bit of effort. You plan on how do you make this interesting. How would this give us a kick by giving the listeners a little bit of extra kick. And that thought process would actually bring out the creative juices in us. And sometimes we would feed off each other and enjoy it. And that was an exhilarating experience. And I really must say I enjoyed that part of it very much. And of course there were the few pranks that we played.
I think you were quite a prankster, isn't it?
Yes, I was. I must confess I'm guilty of that one. I recall on one occasion we used to start the show at 5:30 in the morning. The morning show. I was doing the morning show at the time on a weekly basis.
And now we start at 5.
I know. I think I'm thankful for small mercies that I didn't have to get up as early.
You should be, Viran, because oh my gosh, waking up at 3:30 to be here at 5 is a nightmare, Viran. So you have a lot to be thankful for.
I can well imagine how terrible it must be. But well, I would get here in time somehow, however late a night I had before. And I used to enjoy my shows, but I do recall a joke that I played which I thoroughly enjoyed. See, I basically had the fortune of having my morning show for 1 year on the 1st of April, which we know is April Fool's Day. And I decided that at that time the director English service was the late Nihal Bharati. And he was our boss, right? A great veteran broadcaster. And of course, he was the head of the English service at the time. And basically, I told the listeners, it's the start of, I didn't say it's the 1st of April. I said, it's the start of a new month. And the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation has decided that it will engage in a listener engagement process, and we want to get a clear idea of how good the reception is. We want reception reports from all over the country, right? And we want you to call in and let us know how clearly you are receiving us. And in about 30 seconds, just tell us what you feel about what you're hearing, right? But because we had our studio hotline, but obviously I didn't want them calling me. This was a joke on someone else. I said, for this special purpose, we have a special
Oh
hotline set up. And I gave Nihal Bharati's residence phone number on the air. Right? First thing in the morning. Right? And basically, I heard later on that from that time on, his phone had been ringing off the hook until he actually kept it off the hook, because he just couldn't stop the calls coming in. And he'd been wondering initially what on earth had happened. And later he'd been told that it was a joke that was played on him by me. And of course he took it in good spirit. He never pulled me up for it. And of course, I told the listeners towards the end of the show that those of you who called, thank you very much. April Fool.
Yes, and I must say, Viran, you got away with it because Nihal Bharati was a veteran who understood practical jokes as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And most importantly, a veteran broadcaster here at the SLBC. So, Viran, thank you once again for accepting our invitation.
The pleasure is mine.
Viran, the All Asia service was a unique service.
Indeed. Yes.
And we all have, for those of us who joined a few years ago, we all have fond memories with the All Asia service. Early in the morning, of course.
Yes.
Or how important was the All Asia service to you as a broadcaster just beginning?
Well, Mario, that's a very good question. I think the All Asia service was indeed a very, very good service for people who were beginning in broadcasting, because in a number of ways, those Indian listeners were a very endearing bunch. And they were a lot less critical than even our local listeners. And the moment you get on the air and the moment you're introduced, they start sending postcard after postcard, asking after you and so on and so forth. And it was a lovely, informal and warm audience with which to basically begin sharpening one's abilities in the trade, as it were. But I think the significance of the All Asia service actually extended beyond that nice warmth that we felt, because I experienced firsthand just how powerful a tool the All Asia service of the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation has been in times even before mine. It's something I got to know when I had the occasion of being a master of ceremonies at sort of an opening ceremony for the Chiefs of Defence Staff, which was hosted in Colombo. Some years ago, and I was perhaps one of the only civilians there. There were the Chiefs of Defence Staff, which meant the topmost generals and admirals and so on and so forth from all the countries in the region. So from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, Malaysia, and of course Sri Lanka. All 3 4-star generals and so on. They were there, and I was the master of ceremonies at a very tasteful opening ceremony that was put together. And once it finished, there was a tea break. And about 2 or 3, a few people of the attendees, all generals and admirals and so on, would come and speak to me. And 2 people came up to me and they asked me, what is your name? So I said, I'm Viran Corea. And perhaps because Corea is not as commonplace as some other surnames like, say, Fernando or Pereira or De Silva. One of them asked, are you anybody of Vijay Corea? So I said, yes, he's my father. And they said, "Oh, I see." And then I said, "How do you know him?" Now, this was a military man, top brass in his country. I think he was from India, and the other colleague that he came with was from Pakistan.
Yes.
And the gentleman from Pakistan said, "I also know him." So I said, "How do you know him?" "Well, we don't know him, but we know of him." And then they told me their story. They said when they were young, they have now reached the top of their profession, right? 3-4-star military army generals. When we were young military cadets in training, we didn't have any English channel to listen to except for the All Asia service of the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. And so early morning when we used to go for our runs and so on, with that little transistor, we would listen to the morning show. And we have heard this person, Viran Corea, and then he rattled off the names of lots of other people whom I know, people like Virajendra and so on and so forth. We knew all of them because we would hear them in the morning, and it was that music that gave us a start to a very difficult day. Military training is not easy,
of course.
Right? It gave us a good start, and we are grateful for those wonderful times we had listening to the All Asia service. So said two decorated generals. So that to me showed that the All Asia service of the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation was a tool by which the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation perhaps gave some leadership or was very much ahead in a certain field in the entire region. And I think that is something that we as Sri Lankans can take great pride in.
Yes, thank you, Viran, for that memory. And sometimes even us or we behind the microphone, we take our roles for granted sometimes. We don't really understand what an impact we as presenters or broadcasters might actually have on the other side. And thank you for reminding us of the gravity of the role we play behind the microphone as well. I mean, to really be of some inspiration to someone, as you said, starting off the day, we may take it for granted, but it can make a huge difference on the other side.
Absolutely. It can be one of those things that makes a significant difference in people's lives, because sometimes not just the music that you play, but even the information that you share can enable someone to process their environment better, enable people to have a better approach, particularly if you take a time such as this, right? The time of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a difficult time, not just for Sri Lanka, for the whole world. It's easy to criticize people and say they should be done better, that should be done better. Perhaps some things could be done better, perhaps some things are being done as best they could. It's a difficult time for the whole world. Right? The most we can do is help people to do things better, understand things better, and to help them to get through these times. And I think radio is a great tool by which on a regular basis people can be reminded of what they should do, what they should not do, and how they can make sure that the quality of their lives is better, including how better to do business. There's a lot of information online and so on and so forth, lots of information that perhaps even government authorities would be able to provide, which can be taken and used. But it is never going to make the cut, I feel, if we just take that information and just dish it out clinically. There has to be a little bit of creative thought on how to make it more engaging, how to make it more interesting, and make it find a little place in the memory cells of the person who is listening. And that's where the art of the radio presenter, the craft, comes in. So there's a lot that can be done, and I believe that radio in Sri Lanka has an important role to play.
Yes, thank you, Viran. I think the radio is very powerful, because, and something that we pride ourselves in, especially at SLBC, is that we are not just a music station. We just don't CQ music the whole day. We have a variety of programs, Viran. We cater to all strata of society, and be it from education to information to science, technology, and music, and of course the requests. So thank you for reminding us of that. And I think we're running out of time, but we really have to get to this. Viran, what is your advice to the young broadcasters out there, those who are going to join, those who want to join? those who, want to be a part of radio? Because contrary to popular belief, the radio is still very powerful. What is your advice as a senior broadcaster to the young broadcasters out there?
My advice would be, firstly, respect the medium that you have chosen. To be behind the microphone is not something to be taken very casually and for granted, but it's something to be respected. Like an artist would respect, his crayons or his paintbrush, or the sculptor his chisel. The announcer or the presenter, to use the more contemporary term, must respect the microphone. Now, respecting the microphone means a number of things. Firstly, that you will exercise the power that you have to be heard by thousands upon thousands with a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
And that responsibility is in terms of what you do say. There is the old saying, when in doubt, leave out, because you do not want to misinform a member of the public of something when you're behind the microphone. The other is to respect the need for quality. Today there is a day and age of quality, and quality is achieved not just by being able to use creative words and so on and so forth, but also by adhering to certain disciplines. So that is why, for example, there is a schedule in a radio station, right? The schedule is something that the professional broadcaster will look at and go by. The listeners hear the end product, but the young presenters will look at the schedule, understand what the schedule means, envision the concept of the program. How does the program from 9 in the morning till 11 o'clock differ from the program from 3 to 5? There has to be a difference. Why is there a different name? What can you bring to that concept that will enrich it and bring it alive, adding in that uniqueness that you as a person and as a personality will bring into the program? If all that requires thought, a bit of work, commitment to do reference research where necessary, and a commitment to be professional, to adhere to the necessary timings, to adhere to the use of good language, and basically it can be summed up as respecting the microphone.
Respecting the microphone is very important, and respecting each other in the profession as well.
Absolutely.
And finally, Viran, I'm sure our listeners are waiting for this. Viran, what is your message to your fans out there, to those dear listeners? I can see the blinker blinking away on the other side, also trying to get through to you. Some calls coming in here as well. So, Viran, what is your message to those listeners out there who you've entertained for so long?
Well, my message would be, radio is a unique medium. Those of us who have practiced it as a professional art, as a vocation, presenting shows to the public, really feel that radio is a means by which we can share a part of ourselves while performing a public service. And what the listeners can do is to listen constructively. If there are young people on the air, by all means, bring in criticism that is helpful, but do it in a constructive way, in a way that builds up young talent. Appreciate people who are good, give constructive feedback, and keep listening. And I would also say to some listeners, particularly of this audience, of the SLBC's listenership, be open to a little bit of innovation as well in terms of broadcasting, because sometimes something good reaches even greater heights by a little bit of disruptive thinking. So if the management were to bring in a new type of program, it may be something new, maybe a little different to something that you're used to, but in the end you will realize that there is something new and something rich that has been brought in through that as well.
Thank you, Viran, and thank you for that advice as well, because obviously the 1950s or the 60s had to come after the 1920s and the 1930s. So
absolutely,
it is a progress, and if we don't keep up with the times as well, at some point we might not have a listenership at all.
Indeed.
So it's really vital that we move on with the times as well, and music is wonderful as it is. So it's just a matter of tuning our ears, probably.
Absolutely.
Yes. So thank you so much, Viran Corea. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And once again, dear listeners, we were in conversation with Mr. Viran Corea, senior attorney at law and, of course, veteran broadcaster here at the SLBC. And it's been a privilege to speak to you this afternoon, actually.
The pleasure and the privilege has been mine. Thank you, Mario, for having me over and for giving me the enjoyment of being at the microphone again.
Yes, thank you, Viran. And with that, it's time for us to wind up the 11th hour, even though it's close to the hour of 1. And we would like to thank our producer, Indira Navagamua, and Chandima on the other side, who has been of great assistance as well. So with that, we wind up the 11th hour, and over to you, Chandima.